Hello, YouTube. Luigi here. Forgive me, I'm pouring a glass of wine. It's Alexa tells me it's 10:30 uh, on Tuesday evening, some day in February 2019. Okay, I started about a year and a half ago. I started educating myself on the whole climate change issue, and it was really new to me. And I just threw myself at this, and I literally spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours educating myself. And the more I learned, the more terrifying the whole subject matter became, and the more I wanted to learn. And I thought I would condense this down into a lecture series, a PowerPoint presentation, and I would take this to local libraries and give the lecture live. I love hearing myself talk, as a lot of you people know already. And then I realized that was just impossibly daunting to even think of that. I'm going to try to straighten out the camera here. So I started a series of short, concise YouTube videos that dealt with one subject at a time. I made three of them. The first one was an introduction, setting forth an outline of what the material I intended to cover. The second one was about the jet stream, changes in the jet stream in the northern hemisphere, and how it's really screwed up the weather for the northern tier, the northern hemisphere of countries, especially those areas closer to the Arctic Circle. Well, not even closer to the Arctic Circle. Some of these troughs extend all the way down to Florida, these vortexes. And the third one was a great bit of subject matter, melt ponds and moulins, specifically in Greenland, but also in Antarctica. So I did three, and I'm here to announce to you that I'm not going to produce any more other than this one, because when I was doing this, I thought I was just so avant-garde, cutting edge, really out there. And now there are so many really, really, really brilliant PhDs out there covering the same subject matter. Paleo meteorologist, climate science, evolutionary biologist. There's just so much stuff out there if you're a YouTube person, and I am really a YouTube person, because you can search for and learn that which you want to learn, as opposed to being spoon-fed what they want you to see on mainstream network news. So in my bowing out of the future of this series, it was a very ambitious project for me to do. I'm going to pay homage at the end to some of the great minds from which I've learned a great deal. But before I get there, I want to briefly race through a list of topics I would have covered and give you the quickie, abridged Reader's Digest, Cliff Notes version of what it is I would have covered. There's no particular order here. I'm going to read them from a list. I'm going to read you the subject matter and maybe talk as fast as I can about them. The aerosol masking effect. Wow, did you ever hear that? The aerosol masking effect. Because we're burning so much dirty coal, like there's such a thing as clean coal, dirty coal around the globe, India, China, other places. The burning of this coal puts really fine, almost microscopic particulates into the atmosphere called aerosols. This mist of aerosols actually protects the planet from getting too warm. My God, it protects us from getting too warm, meaning it prevents sunlight from reaching the Earth, because this is high up in the atmosphere, and all these particulates are keeping the heat away from hitting the Earth. Well, that sounds like exactly the opposite of what the carbon dioxide is doing, and it is. It's just that the effect of the carbon dioxide holding the heat in is far outweighs the aerosol masking effect. Anyway, it is conjectured that when the heat engine, which is civilization, finally comes grinding to a halt, and nobody's burning any more coal or any other types of fossil fuels on Earth anymore, then that these particulates, within a very short time, like 6 weeks, will all fall out of the atmosphere and end up on Earth, and our aerosol masking effect is gone, meaning that which was saving us from a certain amount of temperature rise because it was preventing sunlight from getting to Earth, is not there any longer, and temperatures will rise very quickly once that happens. Almost another 3 degrees C in a very short time, and that'll just fry everybody. So, as Guy McPherson says, we're damned if we do, and we're damned if we don't. If we shut off the engine of civilization that is pumping all the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we're also going to lose the aerosol masking effect, which means things are going to warm up even faster. Okay, next subject. Massive fish kills worldwide. This is not unique to any particular ocean. It's also happening in rivers. And what's happening here? Well, I can probably think of a few things. One of them is the oceans are oxygen depleted, largely. Nothing is completely anything. Meaning the oceans are our biggest sink for carbon dioxide. Well, the atmosphere is choking on carbon dioxide, and the oceans have taken on all they can in terms of a sink for carbon dioxide. That coupled with, this is a conspiracy of conditions, coupled with rising temperatures. A lot of species cannot adapt to rising water temperatures. They're used to living in a certain zone, and they do fine. But once the temperatures rise, they're sort of out of their element. And the real elephant in the closet is Fukushima, that which nobody wants to talk about. How many hundreds of thousands of gallons of incredibly toxic water are they still dumping into the oceans? And its effects now are far more than just the Pacific. The amount of deformed fish being pulled out into the nets of fishermen is unbelievable. Fish catches are down pretty much worldwide. The fish aren't there in the numbers they used to be. They're dying off mysteriously, or maybe not so mysteriously. And also, the Fukushima has probably got to be one of the biggest. And you have to remember that like a third of the world gets most of its protein from the sea. So this is a major source of food for a world who's choking on a really, really heavy population. To begin with, the rapid disappearance of insects. Wow. We've heard for decades about we're losing our bees. Well, I think this started on the Tom Hartman show. Some anecdotal caller phoned in. He was a cross-country truck driver, and he made this route back and forth, back and forth, back and forth all the time. And he said, it wasn't that many years ago that I had to stop at every rest stop and scrape the dead bugs off my windshield. Now I go coast to coast without cleaning them off once. This one phone call prompted an avalanche of every other trucker who's had the same experience calling in and affirming it, reaffirming it, confirming it, that this has happened to me too. So all the studies across the world are pretty much coming up with the same types of numbers, that 80% on a species by species basis, 80% of insect species have lost 100% of species out there have lost 80% of their biomass. In other words, insects are disappearing, so to speak. And if we lose our pollinators, we're in big, big trouble. Carbon dioxide emissions. How do you even start this story? It's too big. I'm not going to. But basically, suffice it to say that there have been scientific experiments that go back to the late 1700s, where a guy fills one greenhouse with carbon dioxide and the other one, a scientist, the other one just normal atmospheric gases, and watches the temperature rise in one relative to the other. We've known this for ages. Jim Hansen knew it for ages. The ExxonMobil study came out decades and decades and decades ago, warning us that we would be exactly where we are today with temperature rise. And so, of course, that report was squashed because it came from ExxonMobil. Uh, Dirty snow and dirty ice, and the loss of albedo. Albedo is the whiteness of either snow or ice that reflects its radiation back, back into the atmosphere. So, where does this soot come from that finds its way up to Greenland and finds its way? It's mostly Greenland because most of the land masses are in the northern hemisphere. Most of the industrial activity in the world is in the northern hemisphere. So these particulates find their way up to Greenland and cover the. You've seen pictures of dirty snow up there, dirty ice. These are soot from what? Well, industrial activity, the big one, volcanic activity, forest fires. I heard someone asked Neil deGrasse Tyson, well, what about these so-called natural sources, forest fires and volcanoes? How much are they responsible for the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? And he said, that's a great question. And this has been studied. And our most conservative estimates of what the natural sources are to the contribution of CO2 in the atmosphere is 5%. 95% of the CO2 in the atmosphere we put there. Let's own it. We put it there. Man-made climate change. I can't believe there are people who still don't think that's even possible. Dirty snow and dirty ice. What happens? The ice is black, absorbs the heat from the sun. The snow and the ice melt faster. The faster melt-off contributes to greater sea level rise. Blah, 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 blah. This is one of these feedback loops. Okay, it goes on and on and on indefinitely. Glaciers around the world. Time for a sip of wine. I'm drinking an Australian Shiraz. Glaciers around the world. Most people think of glaciers in terms of Antarctica and Greenland. Well, sure, that's a normal place to think of the two biggest ice sheets on the planet. But guess what, people? There's the Alaskan glaciers, the Canadian glaciers, the Andean glaciers, the Patagonian glaciers, the Argentinian glaciers, the Alpine glaciers, and the Himalayan glaciers. We have a national park in our country, America. I'm from USA. It's in Montana, Glacier National Park. Glacier National Park was well named in its day because it had 140 glaciers. Guess what, people? It's down to 20. What are we going to name it? The former Glacier National Park? Don't take my word for it. Go out and count them. So I want to go back to the Himalayan glaciers. 2 billion people plus, if you throw in India and China and everybody in Southeast Asia into this mix, over 2 billion people rely on the Himalayan glaciers for pure, fresh, cold, crisp, clean glacial water. Where do they get this water? 5 mighty rivers: the Ganges, the Indus, the Mekong, the Yellow, and the Yangtze. These 5 rivers alone, these are mighty rivers, every single one of them. What's happening is the weather is warmer now during the warm months, and the glaciers are melting very quickly, much more quickly than they ever have. Meaning what? Meaning that during the warm season, these rivers are flooding. There's plenty of water in the winter, but in the warm season, these rivers are flooding. And when these waters dry up, as all glaciers eventually will now, Glacial National Park has shown us that. The fastest receding glacier in the world is in Alaska. When these rivers dry up, and what are billions and billions of people going to do for water then? Glaciers around the world. 105 degree Fahrenheit wet bulb temperature. Many people think that the threat of climate change is sea level rise. Well, sure, if you're in a coastal community. I mean, if you live in Bangladesh, I mean, you're toast. 163 million people, goodbye. The whole country's, I think the highest point in the country is 10 feet above sea level. One mega typhoon, goodbye Bangladesh. And in anticipation of this, because East Indians, don't like Muslims, India's been building a wall to keep the anticipated climate refugees out of India. And this makes me think, regarding Trump's wall, it's not about Mexicans, it's not about rapists, it's not about cartels, it's not about drugs. It's about that caravan that came up from Guatemala. These were climate refugees fleeing a drought, a severe drought. And it just might be that Trump isn't telling us his real agenda about this wall. It might be that nations around the world now are trying to protect themselves from the anticipated onslaughts of huge amounts of population on the move as climate refugees. Remember the Syrians, how they invaded Europe? That was because of a drought, and the people were starving, and they revolted against their government, and it started a civil war. We've seen climate refugees already. The Arab Spring was likewise related to food not being able to be grown because of a drought. So it's already started, and it's only going to get worse, before we all turn into cannibals. What did I say? 105-degree wet bulb temperature. Oh, yeah. A lot of people think the threat is in coastal communities, and it is, but it's not. But not everybody lives in a coastal community. Yes, the majority of the cities are there for reasons of shipping and commerce, but 105-degree wet bulb temperature means that's the temperature at which your body and mine can no longer expel its heat. 105 degrees Fahrenheit wet bulb temperature is the temperature at which we start to burn up inside our own bodies, starting with the brain. We fry the brain twice. We've heard, over the last 20, 30 years, there have been massive heat waves in like Chicago and Paris and these cities where people are trapped in these hot, unair-conditioned tenement buildings. And the death counts get to 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people in a city, a modern city, where basically the lights are still on. So, it's really easy to fry to death when temperatures get that high. The Amazon rainforest, well, no longer the lungs of the planet. Can't count on it anymore. It's been deforested so badly for what? Agriculture and livestock raising. We'll talk more about livestock raising in a minute. Saltwater intrusion and the loss of drinking water. Well, take Florida, for example, with its very porous limestone substrate. These people have wells. They're pumping, I can't say it's an aquifer, but they're pumping water out of this porous substrate. And when that water goes out, there's a vacuum there, and the ocean water rushes in to take it over. And the line of saltwater intrusion is creeping more and more inland with every single year. You don't need a typhoon to push this water in, and a high tide will push it in. Miami has what they call sunshine flooding at every king tide, and it's not raining. It's just that the tide is coming up through the sewers, the manholes. Yes, they've spent $160 trying to remedy that, and they realize they maybe only bought 20 years. But the truth is, it's a Band-Aid on a really, really bad wound. Speaking of pumping water out of aquifers, because of California, the breadbasket of the country, well, they can't rely on rain, so they sink these wells, and they do these circular irrigation things, and they're pumping their aquifer dry every year. Every time they drill a new hole, the borehole has to go deeper and deeper and deeper because the water just is, they keep lowering the level of the aquifer. And as this water level goes down, the land is sinking. There are parts of California that have already sunk 70 feet. 70 feet. Yeah, so that water's not going to be there forever. Frequent, more intense, more damaging storms dumping more and more precipitation. You've seen that. We've seen that already. When someone tells you, oh my God, look at this blizzard, look at how much snow it's falling. We've never had snow like this. We've never had blizzards like this. No such thing as global warming. Well, it's a direct result of climate change. And let me explain. And once you hear this, you'll never ever say, look at this blizzard, there's no such thing as climate change. Weather. Weather is the atmosphere's way of dissipating the energy that it has taken on from the sun. When you trap the energy of the sun with a blanket of carbon dioxide, there's more and more energy that needs to be dissipated through what? More and more storms. All storms, summer and winter storms, are going to be more intense. Why are they dumping more and more precipitation? Because hotter air holds more moisture, more water vapor, and therefore it's dumping more. So you can't point to a blizzard, people, and say no such thing as global warming. That doesn't work. It's exactly why the blizzards are more intense. Exactly why. Methane, permafrost melting, methane hydrates in the ocean floor melting, the real ticking time bomb. Well, this is too huge a subject to get totally into, but suffice it to say that methane is, in the first 10 years, 20 times more damaging to the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. And over a longer period of time, it's 100 times more damaging than carbon dioxide. So methane is the real ticking time bomb here. Say goodbye to coral reefs and the fantastically rich, diverse sea life habitats that they foster. They're bleaching out because of temperature. What a shame. What a shame. The devastating consequences of worldwide livestock production. Wow. That's for those of us who eat too much meat. Who says we eat too much meat? Well, they say that if you were to look at some of these livestock farms from the sky, from satellite images, you would not think you could cover so many acres with just barns feeding livestock. They're not outside grazing, eating grass, having this great life. They're tied to stalls where they just munch on grain all day long. And antibiotics, too. So what does this mean? It means flatulent cows, they say, are no small contributor to methane in the atmosphere. And I believe it once you've seen these things from satellites. And also, get this, it takes 26 pounds of grain protein to produce 1 pound of beef protein. Do you know how many people you could feed with 26 pounds versus 1 pound? That's something that's just the economics of that will eventually redress itself. Boy, that's about all that's on my list right now. And I was going to do individual videos on every one of these subject matters because God knows there's a ton of material out there. And, I think people, number one, they don't want to hear the message. Number two, they're in denial. Number three, they believe our president says, oh, it's a hoax. It's a hoax, my ass. Hoax. The science is overwhelming. I mean, you have to have your head in the sand not to recognize what's going on in the planet. When people say, and intelligent people say this, my own brother says this. He says, oh, this is just part of a natural cycle. Great, anybody can say that, but they don't back it up with this much science. They just say something because maybe they're terrified of the reality of it, and they need to convince themselves that it's not so bad, right? It's not going to be so bad. Natural cycles? Sure, the Earth has been hotter with warmer or higher levels of CO2. But if you look at those geologic timescales, it took 200,000 years for it to reach there. We're getting there in decades. Decades. You know? I'm going to list some names of some of the brilliant PhDs, scientists in all manner of fields to whom I have just been held rapt by their lectures and their presentations. And there's no small amount of frustration, even anger, in many of these people relative to the deaf ears and the lack of response by the alleged leadership in the world. I'm going to read some names here. Dr. Peter Wadhams, he's in Cambridge University, and he's probably the world's specialist on oceanography and methane as well. Dar Jamal, general climate scientist. Sir Richard Attenborough, one of the most articulate exponents of talking about climate change. Noam Chomsky, another articulate spokesman. Guy McPherson, my favorite, a evolutionary biologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Arizona, and a guy who gave up much in his personal life. He's paid a hell of a price to preach his message. James Hansen, former NASA climate scientist, who had to quit because, for professional reasons, they kept squashing his data. James Hansen is considered the godfather of climate science. Michael Mann, American climate science, who unlike everybody else in the pack here, he paints a rosy picture like, oh, we can fix this. And everyone else is saying we're past all the tipping points, it's irreversible, and it's going to be abrupt. Hey, I hope he's right, but it doesn't look like he's. Eric Rignot, a Frenchman, the world's expert on glaciers. A guy named Jim Balog, or is it Blaylock? A photographer who's dedicated at least a dozen years of his life to setting up hundreds, if not thousands, of time-lapse cameras all over the world to document the movement and the retreat of glaciers around the world. A lady named Svetlana something. I'm sorry, Svetlana, I don't know your last name. She is a Russian climate scientist who is an expert on methane. And then there's a radio television host personality named Tom Hartman. And the guests he has on, he's a really sharp guy. The guests he has on tend to be these people and others that he either interviews via Skype because they're in Cambridge or someplace, England, or he has them in the studio, and he focuses on this subject matter largely, not exclusively, but largely. So I'm going to encourage you, if you want to learn more, there's plenty of much better YouTube videos than my stuff. There really is, out there by brilliant PhDs. I know it's frightening subject matter, you know. It really is, because basically we're facing extinction. The planet will still be here. The third rock from the sun will still roll around the sun, okay? But the habitat will be gone. And without any habitat, you support no life. So, as Dr. Guy McPherson says, at the edge of extinction, only love remains. All right, everybody. Take good care. God bless you. I love you all. Good night.